All right, so in the interest of coherence, of practicing telling the story of bioregionalism, we start off these meetings with a description of bioregionalism, giving people the opportunity to sort of share it from their perspective. And so I'm going to read what Claire wrote in our chat before we hand it off to Poyom to hear about its directory project and the bioregional emergence in Nevada City. So Claire said this just, I think, yesterday or the day before. What feels the most powerful to me about bioregional framing is seeing the land as a whole, interdependent, interconnected systems that cannot be divided up or parts of it damaged without causing harm. Sorry, I should have reread this. We understand that this as at the scale of our own bodies, where the heart or lungs cannot be removed without killing the person, while a finger could be lost without catastrophic results. So to me, understanding a bioregion as a whole system provides a powerful counter-argument to the piecemeal, human-centric Cartesian model. It reframes the discussion so that we can no longer use the old justifications for doing what is ecologically incoherent, because within this context, those arguments make no sense. The more I can learn about the coherence of my bioregion as a whole system, the better the decisions I will be able to make of how to live on the land. Some of these ecological systems are overlapping systems, but not completely occupying the same land base. I guess the trick is to discover where the skin of the bioregional body ends, recognizing that none of us end at our skin. And then in parentheses, she says there's bacteria, food we eat, air we breathe, emotional well-being connected to cultural niche, etc. However, we require that all that is within our skin is contained and operates as a whole. So I love the metaphor of the body. It's a natural pattern that is replicated everywhere we look in nature. So how do we take that to the bioregion? So thank you for that, Claire. That was great. Sorry for the misreading at the beginning. My eyes, I think, were warming up a little bit. But Poyom, I'm going to give you co-hosting. Where are you? You're at the bottom. Oh, he keeps moving around on me. Make co-host. All right. And over to you. So we'll hear from you, and then we'll jump into conversation after a while.
Great. And thanks, Claire, for that great description. It was really good to hear it read. I appreciated it again the second time. So let's see. Let me try this. Great. Give me a second. I'm still trying to. There we go. Is that working? There we go. Are you guys seeing a big green square?
Yes.
I don't know what that's about, but.
Oh, no, I'm not seeing a big green square. Sorry. No, you're good.
Okay. I'm having a little trouble with my slides. Just give me a second. I'm spinning. There we go. Let me try that again. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the story around the source directory, which is the directory that I created for the bioregion. And at the end, I'll add some more information about the bioregion itself. I mean, I do talk a little bit about it. The bioregion is essentially the Sacramento River Watershed bioregion. And I talk a little bit later in the presentation about why I selected that bioregion. But to introduce, I think I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So I'm a father. I've got 3 adult children in their early 20s. Wonderful wife that I don't deserve. Been an artist my whole life. I'm trained as a hydrologist and an engineer. I've been on an entrepreneurial journey the last several months. And I have my permaculture design certificate, and clearly I can't spell sometimes. And some of the questions that drive me there at the bottom. And that's a lot of what has pushed me sort of. So I have been an engineer in a corporate position, and it's kind of pushed me out of that position, these questions.
Poyom,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering whether we're seeing the whole of the slide.
What do you see?
mentioned- Well, I see nothing after permaculture designer.
Yeah, that's the green square. Okay, thank you. Let me try this again. Let me go back. Let's try this again. Thank you, Mitty. I appreciate that.
And for the record, permaculture is kind of a funny misspelling anyway.
Yeah.
Bring me a little chuckle.
Let's try this again. Okay, that's better, right?
That looks great.
Okay, so talk to you about the directory. I think there we go. So the questions, how can I best serve? And what is my highest calling? Those questions have driven me for a long time, and I've definitely had some major shifts in thinking around those questions in the last several years, as we've all gone through this insane transformation that we've been on the last couple of years. So there's a delay in the slides. So I know, apologize for this being difficult to read. It's not that important. This is one of my paintings from when I was in college. I studied at UCSC. I got degrees in both physics and art. I later went on to San Jose State University, where I got a master's degree in civil engineering with an emphasis on water resources. And at UCSC, sort of I've been studying art. I've been doing art my whole life, so I couldn't let that go. But for whatever reason, I felt like that wasn't enough. I had to do something different, and I didn't know what that was. I was kind of looking around at different things, and I was fascinated by astrophysics and astronomy, learning about galaxies and quasars and things like that. There was no astronomy program, so like a fool, I went into physics. And my final thesis was on sort of the large scale structure of the universe, kind of some topic around that, which I did find fascinating, but struggled through the classes the whole time because it's pretty difficult. But that prepared me to, when I, after that, so it was around I think it was my senior year. I stayed there more than 4 years, but it was towards the end of my time there. A good friend of mine, he had gone off to Hawaii, and he came back and was telling me all about this thing that he learned at this workshop in Hawaii called permaculture. And I was fascinated. Now, there was an agroecology farm there at UCSC, but it was part of the environmental studies program. And there was a big section of the environmental studies program you had to learn about law, and it just totally turned me off. So I didn't participate in the agroecology farm, but once he talked to me about permaculture, ever since then, I was fascinated. I kept learning more. After I graduated, I started studying ecological landscaping. That was one of my first sort of consistent jobs. I had several jobs, but that was my first long-term job after school, where the designer, she planted native gardens by plant community based on the sort of orientation of the temperature, like the climate and things like that for that garden. So like if it was in like a shaded entryway of a home, she might plant a redwood forest garden, and there might not be a redwood tree, but there would be the plants that you'd find in that redwood forest. And then in addition to that, we would do, a lot of rainwater harvesting in the gardens. So there connecting the downspouts to the landscape, dry creek beds to collect water in the gardens. I really liked that work a lot. I liked learning about the plants. I liked getting in the soil. I like physical labor, which is a little weird. But I wanted to do it at a bigger scale. So that's what brought me to San Jose State. I was looking around at projects. What kind of projects do I want to be working on? I need to make some more money. I've got these kids. And I was inspired by this project in the South Bay of the San Francisco Bay. And it was called the Salt Pond Project. And they were rehabilitating these salt ponds into be wetlands. They were these like degraded wetland landscapes, and they were rehabilitating them. And so that led me to get this civil engineering degree in water resources. And so from there, I've gotten experience with river restoration, hydrology, stormwater design and planning, wastewater design and planning, and also water planning, which has been interesting. But those same questions that I talked about at the beginning have like continually sort of pushed me through these different phases of my career. So that's probably a lot of background, but I think it kind of helps to frame sort of why I even embarked on this project. So that question that drove me out of the landscaping has continued with me, and even through my engineering career. How do we do this at a larger scale? It's gotten me to think a lot about what is watershed planning. Actually, it's a thing that we do in engineering, but it's a little nebulous, and it's not always the same. And it's very focused on infrastructure, even if you consider, now California has some kind of statement out that rivers and lakes can be infrastructure. But I think some things that I've focused on is like stormwater or rainwater, and I'd include surface water in that. Engaging in that, how do we manage that water that falls down and hits our roofs and hits our driveways and runs, through our storm drains? How do we manage that water? Is a critical piece of like, how do we restore landscapes at scale? And then people, like, how do we deal with people, whether it's the government, whether it's the community members, or whether it's just individual actions? Those sort of that also plays this huge role in how can we do this at a larger scale? Because even if you get the government involved to pay a whole bunch of money, they're limited in what they can do if there aren't people to like really engage. Even if that means government permits or getting a community to buy off or accept what they're doing or to believe in it. And then I put landscape here, but really what I mean is the interaction between like vegetation and soil. Because the area, I was in a conference one time for what's called LID. It's like, some of you may be familiar with that. It stands for low impact development. It's a type of design around stormwater. Sometimes people talk about it in terms of green infrastructure, but it's designing stormwater infrastructure in a way that has less of an impact on the downstream. And so often it's about, if you've heard of Bragg Lancaster and the curb cuts, that would be considered LID if you're talking about it from an engineering perspective, or talking about it to a city. But also there can be like, sometimes you'll see walking down the street, there'll be a tree planted with a grate, and the water can run into that grate and irrigate that tree, the rainwater can. So I was at a conference, talking about these kind of interventions. And this guy who'd been doing it in Portland for a very long time and had quite a bit of success with the city, because initially, not as much now, but initially that was a big issue, getting government on board with doing these kind of projects. And if any of you are familiar again with Brad Lancaster, he had to deal with that as well. And this guy, he said, he was talking about all of these things that they'd done and what seemed to be useful. And finally, at some point, he said, I think the most valuable thing is just more vegetation. The more vegetation that you can have, the more success you're going to have. And I really, that struck something in me, and I've sort of thought about that. It's not quite that simple, I think, but in some ways it is. There's always nuance and different situations, but if we can increase the amount of area, even if you're talking about, you have a balcony and you put raised beds on your balcony, or you install a green roof on your roof or something like that, it's gonna make things better. So after that long excursion, so how did this is kind of how the directory started. I was in a drumming group with this guy. He was leading the drumming group, a community drumming group. And basically people could come to just drum, and he helped facilitate the whole thing. And he said, hey, I'm going to be doing this community resilience tour around the area. And I said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I'd be interested in that, because as an engineer, resilience is something, especially for infrastructure, that gets talked about a lot, or that it was a part of my field that I was interested in. At the time, it wasn't a big part, but it was starting to become a big part. This was probably 2017. Yeah, this was in the probably spring of 2017, or maybe early sort of winter 2016, 2017. And so I helped him to organize this tour. There were some other people, this traveling medicine show. There was two people that from this, there were like holistic health people that were also interested in teaching health through these like traveling shows. And so they were interested in setting up this thing. And I think the guy that I was working with, he got the idea from someone else he'd been working with, who later I met, but that was later on. So anyway, it was basically a series of events that we set up where there were speakers, there were artists, dancers, poets, musicians, and it was all, the focus was community resilience. How do we build community resilience? And we went to different communities and put on these events. And so I helped in a couple of ways. One, I helped sort of frame the concept of resilience for the event. And then I also helped find, speakers. So this event did kind of two things to spawn the directory. One, it helped me to think about this idea, okay, what makes the community resilient? So I went to, some different organizations. Now you can go to resilience.org, but I think it was Post Carbon Institute. At the time, they had some information out. There were some different people that had some information about resilience that I went to kind of get some ideas, and also just, looking at permaculture and thinking about different things. So we sort of came up with these different sort of categories around resilience. What kind of things do you need to make sure you're focusing on in a community that the community needs to sort of support and have going on in order to create some level of community resilience? Because we don't know, at the time we hadn't quite had as much impact. It's hard to believe. It wasn't that long ago, but things weren't quite as crazy as they are now. But the question is, like, you don't know what's gonna sort of cause disruptions. And so really, to build resilience, it's a holistic thing, which is, it's very similar to the work of regeneration. It's not just like you're trying to regenerate one aspect of a landscape or a community. So we had a lot of different people there. I think I already mentioned that. And after this first tour, he also went on to do others, some of which I helped with and some of which I didn't. But during the building of the tour, we kind of thought, hey, like why not, like we need some kind of directory to collect all of these different people that are speaking. So that was where the idea of the directory was born out of. And these are the categories that we sort of ended up with for the directory. And you know, I won't talk about all of them, but I will talk about a few, just in case people, I don't know. Well, let me first say one other thing. Especially when we first started, people didn't quite understand what we were doing. At one of the events, we had some like organic farmer, and there was people there that were concerned about Roundup, and there was people there concerned about what was going on in the irrigation water. And then there was also some first responders talking about wildfire, and there was a woman there talking about heavy metals and how to detox your body from heavy metals. And this woman came up to me later and she said, you know, this is really great. I really love all this stuff about the farming and Roundup, but you just have too much stuff. You just have too many things. It's like not focused on one topic, and this doesn't really make any sense. And now, I don't think anybody, you know, now that we've sort of had major wildfires in our area, everybody's freaked out about fire. And, you know, which just seems weird because at the time that wasn't really happening. And it was only a few years ago. So I just want to address, like, arts and culture is in there because I think that arts, you know, we had poets and musicians and dancers in between speakers. And the reason why we focused on arts and culture is because that's how culture is communicated, and that's how cultures change. If you think about how much a song can affect people. So that's like this important category that it's been difficult to figure out how to loop in, but I think it's an important one. Similarly, health and wellness. It's this idea that if people aren't doing well, if people aren't able to function, they're not going to be able to take care of the place that they live in. And our medical system doesn't try to heal people. That's not its goal. A doctor will never tell you, well, let's try to get you healed, because they don't want to promise something like that. They're not working on healing. They're working to address symptoms. And so providing options for people that can treat their body in a holistic way is important, because even though it's important to have hospitals and emergency rooms, it's really important to also give people access to like really good dietary advice or nutritional supplements or energy work or acupuncture or things like that. And similarly, peace and justice, you know, there's a lot that can go under that category. But if people aren't doing well, if people are being oppressed, if people are being taken advantage of, they won't be able to take care of the place that they live. So I won't go over all of this stuff, but that's kind of where that came from. So this is a map of the watershed. And the reason why we chose to use the watershed as a region is, we're located right around here. I don't. Can you see my pointer?
Sure can, yeah.
Yeah. So the guy I was working with, Michael, who was putting on these events, we put on an event in Nevada City. We put on an event in Truckee, which is like up here, in Chico, which is over here, and in Shasta, which I guess is up here somewhere. And it was during a trip to Shasta, and we looked at the headwaters up in Shasta. There was there's Shasta. There was an image of the Sacramento River watershed, and there's kind of clicked like, oh, like this is, there's nothing more important than the water. And we had already known that if we're talking about resilience, we can't just focus on our little, I don't know if you can see the county lines, but our county is something like this. We can't focus on our little county because we don't provide enough food for ourselves to eat. We don't have enough industry to sort of serve all of our needs. And if we really were going to try to create some kind of sustainable unit, we would need, the people in the valley. We would need the sort of activity going on in Sacramento. Like, we need a larger region to be functioning in a sort of healthy, coherent way in order for us to be resilient. We couldn't do it by ourselves. But then when we saw this map of the watershed, it was like something clicked, like, oh yeah, that's it, right? Like if we could get everybody on the same page of like, yes, let's take care of this river, then that would, that would be a sort of a focus point. So I put some stats over here on the side. It's a big area. That's been one of my challenges. It's hard to wrap my head around such a large area, and to network across such a large area. It provides a lot of water to Southern California, to all over the place, not to mention the groundwater that's used. I think something like 30% of the water that's used in the watershed is groundwater, which, also comes from the water, surface water at some point, maybe, thousands of years ago. But it's a lot of counties, 19 counties, a lot of agriculture. There's a lot of different issues. It has 4 different salmon runs. They're like all the salmon runs in California. They're depleting quickly. There's almost all the rivers are dammed with rim dams. So a lot of the salmon habitat has been destroyed. There's a lot of pesticide use in the valley. There's groundwater overdraft that's happening. And then especially in this North Valley, it's pretty rural, and there's a lot of very poor communities. So up here in Oroville, I think probably around here, it's a pretty big city, but it's pretty poor. And there's not a lot of resources that come into this area, from sort of government grants and things like that. Whereas like down in Sacramento, they get a lot more funding for different things. Over in Tahoe, they get a lot of funding, and especially, they get all the tourism. We're doing pretty well in Nevada County because of the tourism. But as you move on over into Yuba County or there's Oroville, or over, over down into this area of the valley, you see it gets a lot more impoverished. So there are some different issues that we're dealing with. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. Hopefully I can speed it up. So the I'm not an expert. This was difficult. Here I've got this big spreadsheet of people. Had to import people with a certain template. Had to deal with this software that we decided to purchase to create this. Originally there was a woman who got involved right after the first tour. She said she was really interested. She's like, "Oh yeah, I know how to do this. I know how to build a directory. This is the kind of software we should use." So we bought the software, and I think it was a good software, but immediately it became clear she wasn't going to help us, and I just didn't want it to die. So I ended up building it, but this is not my area of expertise. I'm an artist, and I've over different points in my younger years did some kind of graphics stuff, but still, that wasn't my area of expertise. So that there was, and it just meant more time in front of the computer. My boss got pretty upset with me a couple different times because I was not putting my time into work that I should have been doing. It was a big lift at different times, and it kind of went in phases where it's like I would put a bunch of effort into it and then sort of had to put it down for a little while and then go back and put a bunch of effort into it. But it's been a challenge. So there's a little delay and the slides turn over. So what is it? Let's just get into it here. So this is the goal. The main goal is to highlight and promote the people in the region who are working to make the region healthy, thriving, and vibrant. So, normally I would at first I just wanted to talk about it in terms of regeneration. We're just going to regenerate the Sacramento River Watershed. This is a regenerative directory. But then I started realizing I felt not only did most people not understand what that meant, I didn't know if I felt comfortable using that term to describe everything in the directory or even the directory itself. So that's my goal, is to create a regenerative directory, but is it actually doing that? I don't know. So then secondarily, the goal would be to give a place where people can come to learn about how they can participate in creating a healthy, thriving, vibrant region. Whether that's by sort of going and shopping at the co-op, like where should I buy my food? Oh, the co-op, you can buy local produce. Oh, okay, great. That's something I can do. Or whether it's just information. How do I do some sheet mulching, or how do I create a worm bin or something like that? Now, I don't have an article on sheet mulching or worm bins, but ideally I would. So let's see. So what's there? I have events. I have a community forum. No one's really using the forum, but I put a bunch of questions up, hoping somebody would be interested in answering questions or starting a conversation. There's articles that members can put up, which mostly is me, but it's basically just anything that you think you want people from this community to look at, they can. And then there's like a resource library, which is more like how to make a worm bin would be in the resource library, and that would just be something that doesn't get old, and whereas some of these things like this grant, it may be past the deadline by this point, or World Localization Day. It's not always relevant. So then there's also these member listings, and I can show you. It's kind of hard to show in an image, but I can after once we're done, I can show you a sample member listing. And so the members can put up articles, they can put up forum posts, they can put up videos, they can put up podcasts, they can put up events. And there's more that I don't have listed, products, properties. Eventually I'd like to include those things, but it's all kind of a process. I don't want to put something up if there's nothing really to show. And then under each category, there's also these subcategories. And that's something that I've continually sort of refined. I'm still trying to figure out sort of the best way to organize this. I'm kind of working within the constraints of the existing software. I'm not a programmer. I didn't program any of this. Really, it's just like an off-the-shelf software that I'm sort of able to use to work in this way. You can see there's some members that are outside of the watershed. This person, I think, just really wanted to be in the directory. I try not to have people, there's a few people in the Bay Area too. I try not to have people that are outside the watershed. But, you know, and then this person I actually sought out because even though they're not in the watershed, it's very close. I don't know if you can see that lake, that's Goose Lake, that actually is in the watershed. They're just on the other side of the mountains from Goose Lake, in the basin that's part of this basin that extends into Nevada. And it's the Savory Hub up there, and they do ecological outcome verification services for ranches in our region. And so I was happy to connect with them. Let's see. I like this map view because, you know, I could list all of the people doing citizen science and show them all in a map. So what's next? You know, I created an LLC that the directory is housed under. I would love to create more directories for other locations. And I'd love to also, aside from just the directory, other ways of helping to connect people to the ways that they can engage in the place that they live and feel like they're sort of participating in some internal or external form of regeneration, I guess. And what about what's going on in the Sacramento River Watershed? So, you know, I'm connected to some different things. I'm part of a nonprofit that does environmental science and community science and education, very focused on getting community to learn how to do science and how to understand environmental science and how it affects our health and the health, you know, how what we do affects our health and the health of the environment. And it's called Sierra Streams Institute, but there's lots of nonprofits like that in our region. You know, the Sacramento, in my small town, there's a lot of nonprofits, but also just in general in the region. I mean, I'm in the capital, Sacramento is in the region. I was on some calls recently, a few months ago, for a resilience grant, and there were just thousands and thousands of organizations connected to those calls. And I'm in the process of sort of uploading those organizations into the directory, you know, because the directory that I've created is so broad. It's like deals with the homeless issues, it deals with housing, you know, it deals with you know, food insecurity and you know, all kinds of issues. And so, you know, in some ways that's very difficult, but I've had it every time I come back to this question of like, did I make this too broad? Should I sort of focus on something sort of less broad? I keep coming back to this answer of like, nah, I don't know. I don't know that I really should. You know, so there's that. And I don't know that I'm right, but it's just a lot to get my head and hands around. This picture here is a picture of a workshop that I went to recently. And the reason why I actually went to the workshop is because I wanted to meet Charles and Alpha. But man, was the workshop powerful. So it was organized by Charles, Alpha, and a woman named Allison. And that's her husband there in the blue shirt. And it was great. In the mornings, we did some work creating sort of rainwater harvesting features in the landscape. And then in the afternoons, there were sort of some lectures or learning. And then the last day we did some workshopping together on how to sort of expand this kind of work. And it felt really powerful. I made some really good connections. This guy with his, looking at the camera in the foreground, he's in Davis, and I'm really excited to continue working with him some more. Yoshie is there right behind Alpha. Alpha, there's there with the glasses. Doesn't. Yes.
Is that David Abram? We would just.
Yes, it is.
Because he's on Earth Regenerators.
Yes, he is. Yeah, and I've been wanting to connect with him, and I didn't even know he was going to be there at the workshop, and so I was really glad that I got to connect with him there. And so yeah, it was excellent. And so that's definitely been something that's going on. I've been talking to Alpha a little bit more since then. There's a woman in our area named Elizabeth Harold who I actually met through the events that Michael was putting on. He put on this World Water Day event, I think last year and a couple of years ago. And she has this concept that she calls the Watershed Wisdom Councils, wherein the concept is that every watershed, even a very small watershed, would have a wisdom council of people who want to care for that watershed in some kind of way. And then somebody from that wisdom council will go to the council of the larger watershed, and then, on and on, up until, you have a group of people that are sort of on the coastal councils. And so we had a meeting, what was that, last week, for our first Watershed Wisdom Council for, I guess, essentially Yuba River Watershed, but, because of the people who were there, but just kind of trying to initiate this concept and thinking about how this would work. And it's definitely something I'd be interested in sort of putting a structure to in the directory. One thing that I'm starting to realize, just to go back to the directory a little bit, is, it's great that I have all these connections and people can, I do get people reaching out to, to people in the directory to say, hey, I wanted to talk to you about this thing, or I'm looking for help. I'm having this problem with my leg and I need help. I've got some kind of neuropathy thing going on. Or someone reached out looking for a 50-pound, some guy from Georgia, I think, looking for a 50-pound bag of organic flour. He reached out to one of the co-ops, and the co-op didn't supply that, but I knew this other guy that could and connected them. I don't know if anything ever happened through it, but and so it's great to have the people in there. But nothing, I mean, it's not a community if there are no connections. And so, part of the real work, and I've definitely heard Benji talking about this, is reaching out and talking to people and finding out what they're doing and finding out what they need, and convening in groups. So that's been a lot of the work. And for me, it's been a little bit challenging because either, I've done this work as I'm trying to work a, 40+ hour a week job, or which, I didn't have the time, but so it was like a sacrifice of time towards the job or towards my life. Or now sort of I've left that position and I'm trying to develop sort of other work for myself. And I'm struggling to make enough money. And so, it's another issue where it's like, okay, I have the time, I can put in lots of time, but I don't know that I can justify the time that I'm putting in. And some of that I recognize is a mental state in some kind of way, but it's definitely an issue that's come up. So, and I guess one other thing I'd like to say is that part of the reason why I'm interested in this work is I like that work of networking. I like knowing about what's going on. I think it's fascinating to hear about these different organizations and what they're up to and the projects and the programs. One of my next projects for the directory is to create a series of listings that are the ecosystem restoration projects that have gone on, because there's tons. I'm in that world. I know all of these organizations that have done meadow restoration projects, and there are databases, but they're all siloed. It's like there's a meadow database, or there's like I don't think there's a database of river restoration projects, but like maybe there's a database of what's called vernal pools restoration projects. Or there's mitigation banks that have their projects listed, and things like that. So that's my next big project, is to sort of, and I mentioned that, and someone reached out to me saying they wanted help. So I'm excited about that, but I don't know how long it's going to take me to pull all that together. So I think that's about the end. If people have questions, feel free to jump in and ask. I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff. I guess there's one last thing I'll say. In the beginning, I mentioned that I've had a major shift in my thinking around these questions that have been driving me about my where can I have the greatest good, or what am I being called to do? And all my life, my adult life and my career, I've been driven by this sort of feeling of like, what can I do to sort of make a difference and fix things? And felt very strongly about reducing my carbon impact and things like that. And over the last couple of years, I have had a huge shift in my thinking, where the best way to summarize it is like this question of like, what if nothing's gone wrong here? Like, what if everything is the way it's supposed to be? And what if my only job here is just to experience this place? And that suddenly, like, it's a very simple like frame, but and again, there's like all this nuance there, but it totally shifted my way of thinking into maybe it's arrogant of me to think that I can fix things, or that I'm the one who needs to do something to make things different. And at the same time, realizing that me using less plastic, or wearing clothing that is only natural fiber clothing to produce microplastics or something like that, that makes me feel good. Like, I do that, maybe I should do that because it makes me feel good, not because I'm somehow going to save the planet. And that change in frame really has like thrown a lot of this work that I've been doing into perspective in this like really strange way, and kind of put me on my head where I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. So I just wanted to add that in there. That's not an answer. I'm not suggesting anyone take on that philosophy themselves, but just sort of as an explanation to where I'm at. So thanks. Yeah, any questions are welcome.
RJ, saw your hand.
Yeah, sorry to jump in so quickly because I missed a little bit of this, but I sure got what you're talking about, Poyom. It's long term. It is so gradual. The scale is so enormous for one person or 5 people or even 100 people sometimes. My thought was, I think you're right on. I would totally agree with you that we do this stuff because, first of all, we believe in it and we love it. and we'd like to be spending every waking hour
Exactly.
doing it. But that is beneficial because with that kind of drive, we keep doing it. On the other hand, we know we just can't do it alone. And I look at your area, it is enormous. I really believe it is the watershed that drives everything. So I don't know that that could be cut into small pieces. I think, again, from locally here, and I know I've said this, our alliance has been so helpful, but that means that there have been 20, 25 people working on it for 20 some years. And it is in some ways a scaled down version of what you're doing. It goes into the same areas. The biggest difference is that we have been able to put out a directory for 20 some years. So that gets all over the valley. And of course, volunteers can take it anywhere and put it in a coffee shop or a bookstore or whatever. So people get a little bit acquainted with what we're talking about. And they do use the directory. This last year, the current year, it was only put out online because there is the thing of publishing 5,000 directories, which is what we've done every year here. And who's going to pay for that? Actually, the advertisers did and still do advertise in the back of the booklets. But it meant we could save some money by just putting it out online this year, and we couldn't meet as we regularly do. The college students have been essential to anything that we've done because they're involved all the way through. We have 5 colleges. They're involved all the way through at least 9 months of the year with that, and write articles and get people involved. That's really great. So I look at your little town of Nevada City and I think, well, if I were there, I couldn't do it that way, or we couldn't do it that way. But an alliance is great because it takes the burden off of any one person. And it also makes those community connections along the way, which go far beyond the directory. So just to add that, I think you're doing an amazing, amazing job. And it's too much, as you said, it's too much for one person. And yet it is so essential that somebody does it. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, RJ. I appreciate all that. It's very helpful to hear. Claire, did you have something?
Yeah, just to say, first of all, that was so great to hear what you're doing to get a little bit more of a window into just the area that you're covering, the thinking. I love your, I must have missed at some point that you talked about being an artist as well as your science background and just all that you're bringing in. And of course, you're seeing the bigger picture of it all. So the things that were going through my mind were, okay, if there was a core team for bioregionalism, of course you have to have that, what you've been developing, the directory, because it's the tool that you use. But many different people, different groups use directories for different reasons. And so there are different aspects of what they're going to access. So just to sort of say, but I think that a directory for a core team is such a critical tool for doing that work and just keeping track. So and then the other thing that came to mind was so totally different field. My husband worked on the British Columbia Medical Services Directory when they were starting to put it together, because they realized they had all these different services. And then also by postal code, they realized that people, if there was a practitioner of something closer, they wanted to be able to know how to orient people so that those services were geographically coherent. But anyway, one of the things that I was part of hearing the machinations of all of what went into that. One of the big things was the actual groups being able to have constant access to updating their own information, because that was always changing, and so it's always out of date. And just wondering, as we go ahead for updating, definitely being online, but also I guess information is like power. And so how do you democratize the power of who puts the directory together. It's just something to kind of think about. And then we had been going down the rabbit hole of the SUM app, social systems mapping, where some of that becomes a directory, and just sort of the democratization of that. So there are actually some recordings of our earlier sessions going into it. It's a huge amount of work. It's a lot for any of us to carry. And so we got that far, and then our energy went elsewhere from Bioregional Catalyst. But I just wanted to bring those pieces in there.
Yeah, that's all really great stuff. Well, so first let me just talk about this thing of like I'm doing it on my own. There are some people I've reached out to try to sort of get some interest. I don't have money. I'm not bringing in, for a while I was bringing in around $400. There are paid listings, but I'm more interested in getting the right people engaged. And so that's really been my focus, more than like getting advertisers or funders. And if I'm not getting a ton of traffic, which I get some, I get what is like 600 views a month or something, then it's hard to sort of court somebody to pay. But I've been, one thing that's on my mind is like, okay, there's a group of people that I think might be interested in like joining together and doing some work together around this bioregional issue. Just like setting up a meeting to get us all together and just have a conversation about that. The only other person or organization that I know of that's organizing at this scale is what's called the Sacramento River Watershed Project. And they're a data science project. It's mostly environmental science focused, and they're amazing. I've been trying to get a hold of the executive director for months now. I think she's afraid of me because of my association with the guy who I was working with before doing the events. I think but I don't know for sure. I haven't talked to her, so I don't know for sure. And because I'd love to highlight a lot of their information. They have amazing like scientific data on the watershed, and broken up by sub-watershed and things like that. Anyway, that's a side note. The only other organizations, there's like a North Valley organization that sort of is like a nonprofit, and there's like an organization called Valley Vision that's a nonprofit that do work in the Valley to sort of for capacity building for communities. And I also am planning to reach out to them. They were on those grant calls. But then the other thing I wanted to mention is SUM app. I'd love to get all the people, upload all the people in the directory into SUM app. Everyone who has a live listing in the directory, that's not what's called a claim listing, where it says, are you this person, claim your listing, have access in some way, whether it's I forgot my password, or they could reach out to me and say, hey, I don't know how to get in. They have access to their listing. So that is the thing. But what I am not able to figure out is like, what I'd really like to be able to do is give people the ability to say, oh, I'm working with these people, or I'm collaborating with these people, or I know this person. I don't have a simple way of allowing that to happen at this point, because I think that if that would be super valuable, if I could create a SUM app or Kumo network showing the strength or health of the interconnected networks, especially by sector. I would love that, but it would take a huge effort at this point, because it would require all this outreach and coordinating, which, to think about it in another way, that outreach and coordinating, that's what builds the community, and that's what sort of builds the connection. So it's not like that's a problem. It just needs to happen. So yeah, thanks, Benji. Go ahead.
Yeah, some of the things that you just said sort of answered my question. There's so many things that are coming up for me right now.
The one thing that I keep thinking about is, my head's been so deep into common land for the last few weeks, and now I've been doing all this research on the Four Returns Labs, which is really interesting. I'll be giving a presentation on that next weekend. But all of the, given all of their structure and how they approach bringing people together into systemic collaboration on a landscape scale, I feel like you have so much of it started with your directory. You've got so much scaffolding, you have so much visibility, you've formed so many relationships. I'm not one to give advice. I have never done anything like this, but just as I look at common land and try to then compare your approach to their approach, there's a couple things that I see that are a little different. So so the thing that you are stating as your goal to bring people together, to highlight and promote the people who are working to create a healthy, thriving, and vibrant region. I love that. But then if I look at common land, they talk about the 4 losses of landscape degradation, and they really get into why do we want to move beyond this? What is this for? And then that feeds directly into the 4 returns. And it's just this visceral thing that just draws you in and connects you to the landscape. Whereas yours speaks to me because my head's been in this space forever, but does it speak to just the average person? I don't know. Just something to consider. Yeah. And maybe I'll leave it at that because I see 2 other hands and I don't want to talk too much.
That's very valuable, Benji. I appreciate that feedback a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for
Go ahead,
everything
Lisa.
you're doing too. Yeah.
Had to find the unmute button. I have just a couple of.
Sorry, I'm having a mic issue. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions that are more on the technical or logistical. And my first question is, how much of the directory activity is managed by you versus people who are using it?
It's mostly managed by me. When people sign up, if I'm lucky, they do a lot of their own stuff. A lot of people do, when they finally sign up. Every once in a while, there's somebody who I sign up essentially for them. But as far as content on the directory, it's mostly me. Every once in a while, somebody posts something, but it's mostly me putting events up, or other types of content.
Okay, cool. I think my internet cut out for a second. I'm just going to turn my video off. Yeah, because when you mentioned that, it would be cool to create connections on the platform or figure out what the webs are, that I don't, it immediately kind of popped into my head that would be like if I was a member in your database, that would be a fun kind of almost Facebook type activity.
Yeah.
Who are you connected with? And I have a partnership with so-and-so, and to kind of self-elect into what your own relationships are. That would be a cool thing. I also, I wrote in the chat, I don't know if, I just wanted to say it out loud so that you could hear it because you're probably busy focusing on the video. I work for a tech company, really fully understand was sort of giving back, volunteering opportunity for tech specialists. And I know that a lot of sort of nonprofit type projects come through my company that people can volunteer for in whatever capacity that they're able to give back. So if you're, I'm gonna look into this just because I'm curious how it works myself. But there might be, some way that the tech aspect of it can be taken off your hands, because like I work for a tech company, but I'm not a tech person myself, and I know how much mental space that takes up. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. I'd love to connect with you around that. One of the biggest hurdles in that way is extending the software that I have, right? So there's a software that's off the shelf and it has certain capabilities, and I can research what those are and how to do certain things within the software. You know, it's like with your Facebook page. I don't know how many of you do stuff with Facebook, but there's all kinds of things you can do with Facebook. And you can go and but some of it you have to figure out how to do. But it's all there already programmed in. But if you want to do something different, if I want to do something different with the directory, I need to sort of extend it, whether that's with code or connect what's like an API, like connect to another software that I can have a window that connects to that software. And, you know, there's all these like difficult things in that way. So,
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. My dad coincidentally builds software like that.
yeah.
He has a pretty long background trying to figure out how to make databases user friendly. So
Yeah.
I could also ask him.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you on that. The other thing I want to add about that is, you know, like with Sumo or Kumo or the Sum app, there's another one that uses Kumo that's called Catalyst. There's another thing coming out called Neighborhoods. I've been researching all these different new types of networking software that have been coming out, because, you know, whether it's for this directory, like I see this directory really as like a template. And it's like, you know, the guy that I was working with, he said, hey, you know, let's just expand it. Let's just make it global. And I said, I not only would it be very difficult to sort of keep the bioregional aspect, you know, separate, like to identify who's in what bioregion, but even if we did make it global, I have this belief, now I don't know that it's true, that each region really maybe doesn't need the same thing. It's like, I don't know if that was Claire who said this about, depending on the group, the directory would serve different functions. You know, I honestly don't think I've even found the function that actually serves my region the best. And so, you know, thinking about expanding this really is like, okay, identifying the people in the region who want to take that bioregional catalyst role, and okay, what are the different softwares available to sort of serve those needs, even if you have to like put different softwares together or something like that. So that's definitely something I've been thinking quite a bit about. Go ahead, Mitty.
Thanks, Poyom. Well, first of all, thank you. This was as inspirational as I anticipated it would be. And thank you to Pamela. If you don't know Poyom, Pamela's been doing the most amazing notes on what you said. And I think if you read them through afterwards, you'll be pretty impressed by your own presentation, because it was brilliant. I feel in my waters something growing in and around California. I got a twinge of excitement when I first heard you say that you'd been working on a directory. I have a hunch this can be a template and a prototype for something much, much bigger. That, you know, I think of Jonathan Cabot just to the north of you, who's wanting to co-create something around the whole Klamath River. I think of the River Project down here in Los Angeles, and I think of people like myself fiddling around with these coastal watersheds that are very short and in and of themselves don't tell a complete bioregional story, but tell an incredibly diverse local story. I also agree with you 100% about the sum-up idea, and I don't think it's an accident that Lisa's here and we've got somehow access to database expertise. And I feel that the time is coming to draw together some kind of a team, and it's somehow bioregional, California, your source directory. And I think that if we could dream this thing a little bit collectively, collaboratively, we've got the potential for something that could actually go to the state of California for funding, and catch this wave that is flowing at the present time. And it involves so many different pieces. I'd love to see Alpha and Charles in a team and a dialogue, but I really feel that what you've been doing has the seeds of something really great and something really viable that brings together the technical and the community support, growth, connection. And it's actually speaking to the need for a core team, like, the whole Common Land story. So I'm really excited, Poyom. I've no idea what I'm talking about, but I know from the reaction of my body, something is going right. I also just want to say, I've talked enough and there are other hands up again. I just want to appreciate the artist in you, because when I look at your directory, it's so aesthetically fit for purpose. And I know that's the artist Poyom coming into the story. And that's how art, it feeds us. It feeds us often subliminally, like, Claire's amazing image on the front of Joe's book. I just have to look at that image when I'm feeling down, and I feel regenerated just by seeing it. I look at your directory, and without even going deeper into the content, I know this is something that is useful, valuable, needs to be nurtured, supported. Oh, and just one more thing. Everything I've known about entrepreneurs, being an entrepreneur myself, supporting entrepreneurs, working with entrepreneurs as a guide and consultant, the first 2 to 3 years are blood, sweat, and tears typically. And if you make it through that first 2 or 3 years, then you have resilience. you have the necessary resilience to take it further. So however this strikes you, if you're ready to get together in a team conversation, I'm ready to talk and invite others in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a need for a core team. And then, yeah, as far as just speaking again about if to expand this thing about the coastal watersheds, I've put a lot of thought into what different bioregions could be. I don't know if you guys noticed that map that I put up. There's all kinds of different ways bioregions are split up. I have a contact I've been meaning to reach out for Cascadia. A big part of it is funding. That's why I was on that grant call, but very quickly being on that call, I realized this is not the place for me to get funding. I hung around a little longer because it's fascinating to me what they're doing and how they're organizing. And then again, similar, it's just coming up in what you said is this importance of, so I think that there's the directory, what I've created, but what I don't have is the organization behind the directory. And I don't know that they need to be the same thing or not. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that as actually facilitating those conversations and supporting the work of sort of the bioregion, whether it's projects or connecting people or creating that community. So anyway, thanks. Go ahead, Benji.
Or serving the flow of the social ecology is the phrase that was popping into my head. I see we have like almost no time left. I want to hear from Claire. All I wanted to say is Paul Sergino. I don't know if you're aware of his directory yet. He's been working on a directory for a very long time, different area, Salish Sea, but he's got a ton of insights and a ton of opinions. We all know Paul. He thinks about things really deeply and critically. So he'd be worth connecting with about taking this to another level, or at least just to have a conversation with. I would include Vivek, and then also Hilo, right? Claire Palatino, Chad, is that her last name? And Tibet Sprague. They're earth regenerators. They pop in every now and then, but they're in California. They've been thinking about this, same problem, larger scale, but they're thinking bioregionally. Could be interesting to connect with them. So I'll leave it at that, so we can hear from Claire as well.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, you brought up the Turan Collective. So they and Carrie, God, I can never think. Chad knows who I'm talking about.
I know who you're talking about too.
Yeah, because they're part of Planet Drum. But anyway, my big question to you was just like thinking about who could you be thinking about as a core team in order to be to me, that's so critical. And I just want to say that when you're writing grants, like one of the things that I know I find really helpful is to get like that really big vision of what it is you're trying to do, and then you fit it to the grant. You don't allow the grant, because when you're starting to write that grant, it starts to shape how you're thinking about this. Like always fit your the grant into your vision. Don't allow the grant to shape the vision, because the vision right now for the grants doesn't seem to be big enough or capable of putting this. So yeah. And and I think that whole thing about like that piece that I wrote about the bioregion and the coherence of the system, like to me that is like such a critical piece, is that we keep trying to fit ourselves into incoherent systems, like just keep the coherence. I'm preaching to the converted here, but yeah, there's others. Pam.
Yeah, I was just wanting just a little bit more clarification when you mentioned your directory being a template. Can it actually serve as a functional template, or just as not just, but because it really does look quite extraordinary. Oh, good, there is the link. So yeah, do you actually have a kind of template that other people could use to build their own directory from? One question. And the other one is this a conversation that because there's a lot of energy that's being circulated right now about what it is you're doing and how other people can perhaps feed in or take it further for their own areas. And is this something that a conversation that should be carried forward in another space in Earth Regenerators when you're ready for that?
Yeah, I probably. I'm not sure about the second question. I feel I'd have to explore that a little bit more. But the first question, I think yes, there is a template in. Thanks, Mitty. In that the software itself, you could use that same software. I could help somebody sort of get that set up. They have a lot of support. There's a financial cost to that. And there's been different points actually where people have said, oh, I really like what you did. Can you do this for me? And I've said, yes. But I'm still, I've sent out proposals, but it's still ambiguous as to whether or not that's going to happen. And it's not, those directories are not the same in terms of like a bioregional directory. But yes, like the template from that software could create sort of another sort of thing with that same software, but it could also be just the template in the sense of like, okay, maybe you want to split your bioregion up into sectors, and sort of how are those organized? Maybe how do you want to organize the, what gets shared or something like that, but you want to use a different software. So it could serve in a template in that way, I think, as well. Essentially, like Lisa said, it's a database, and it's just how is this database shared? So Hilo is also just a database, but it's very different layout. It looks very different when you get to it. And I've considered sort of, could you just do this with Hilo? And I'm not sure that you could. At some point, this was like years ago, we considered doing a Mighty Network for the forum. They didn't have a forum feature at that point. But then we ended up not going that direction because of the sign-on. The single sign-on would have been very expensive. So anyway, I won't go on too much since we're at end of time here.
Okay. Well, thank you, Poyom, for the shares. Awesome to hear more about what you have going on. I'm really impressed, and I love the origin story coming from the events where we were traveling around, bringing the conversation of how we create resilient communities. So excited to see where this goes too. Let me know how I can support. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. And because we're over, I'll go ahead and just take a quick breath in closing. Gratitude for everyone showing up. Join us next week if you want to hear more about Four Returns Labs. Could be really interesting. And I'll see y'all soon. Maybe tomorrow at the bar chart update or exploratory session, a campfire. We got plenty of stuff going on. So long.
All right. Thanks, everyone.